All right. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can. The thumbs down was a
Okay.
good game.
Gotcha. Yeah. Welcome in, everybody. It's a tough game. Rockets fall in a Saturday afternoon special on Amazon Prime TV. Rockets fall 115 to 105 in Miami in a game that was pretty physical. And the Rockets, for the most part, got bullied today. There's lots. Kevin Durant was certainly his special self. He put up 32 points, was efficient shooting from the field. KD did certainly his part. There's lots to talk about. Reed Sheppard closed the game. There's none of that talk about him not playing at the end. Played big minutes, 35 plus minutes. But Rockets down the stretch just could not hang with Miami. I'm here with Ben DuBose. You can follow him on Twitter and Blue Sky at Ben DuBose and read all of his stuff on Rockets Wire and on ClutchFans, as well as Paulo Alves. Paulo, it's good to have you here as well. You can follow him on Twitter at Paulo Alves NBA. Really good follow for Rockets and NBA talk. Guys, there's lots to talk about and address. We're certainly going to talk about some of the players here for this game, but this was one where after a really blistering hot start out of the gate for the Rockets, which everybody was like, oh my gosh, this is for real. I think it was a 37-14 Miami run from there that changed the game.
Yeah, I think this is a frustrating one because the Rockets got beaten at their own game. Like, they were out physical, they were bullied, as you said, and I think it's only fitting that we have Paulo on today because if there's two things that Paulo is known for, well, there's probably more than two things, but I think if you listen to the Rockets launch pod and shows that I've done with Paulo over the years, you know a couple of Paulo's favorite talking points. This year, it's been about the regression from Alperen Sengun on defense. And ever since, well, even before Khalil Ware was drafted, that was his guy. And then you fast forward to today, and Miami's backup center outplays Houston's starting center. And the Rockets also don't have Steven Adams. They don't have Jabari Smith Jr., who typically does a lot to help Sengun when it comes to defense and rebounding and providing another physical presence inside. You don't have the backup in Steven. You don't have the reinforcement in Jabari, who typically starts alongside Alpi. So it's basically Alpi and four perimeter guys in that starting lineup. And both Bam Adebayo, who you would expect, Bam's an all-star level player, but also Khalil Ware outplay Alperen Sengun, your all-star. It's tough to come up with a formula to win when that happens. So, Paulo, I don't know what to say. I'll just kick it to you on that because it feels like a game in which, Sengun's shortcomings defensively were exposed, and also, all the reasons you were high on Khalil Ware going into, that draft class a couple of years ago. I think those were on display today as well.
Yeah, it just feels like, sorry to throw it back again to last year, but it feels like last year the Rockets just had two elite advantages: offensive rebounding, elite defense. And now it seems like the Rockets don't have an advantage basically anywhere other than Kevin Durant. Having probably the best go-to scorer on every single game, not every single, but most of the games, is probably the Rockets' only edge at this point. We're not getting that edge offensive rebounding. Our defense is not nearly the same, and we're not a good offensive team either against most teams. And what that leads to is just games like this game where the Rockets should just completely out-talent the Miami Heat, but it just doesn't matter because at any point in the game, they are always at risk of being 10 points down. There's very few teams in the league that the Rockets are just clearly being too big of an ask for those other teams, right? It feels like every single team that plays the Rockets is in the game until the very end. And when you play a lot of games like that, you're going to finish games like you did this time where you just can't buy a three. And since you're not that good of a defensive team, you can't string stops together, then you're not going to be able to make up for that on the defensive end the way they did last season. And to touch on your Sengun point, you guys have heard plenty from me about Sengun. I was initially low on him, then got really high on him last season because the defense seemed to be a major step forward. But now, it's not even just the defense. Defense has clearly regressed. The rebounding has regressed as well. We used to look at Sengun and see a guy that would get, a lot of offensive rebounds and be in the correct place at the correct time. That's mostly gone as well. And then, well, what the sell on Sengun is he's going to be such a good offensive player, draw so much attention, be so efficient that you can live with whatever defensive shortcomings come with. Well, it's yet another game where he's been inefficient, not only for a center, but for a guard as well. The stat line that he put up today for a guard is an inefficient stat line. More turnovers than assists. 6 of 14, 43% from the field. Like, that's terrible numbers for a guard, let alone a center. And it's it feels like this was a game where the Rockets couldn't shoot, right? And then the two guys from their team who they don't rely on shooting for, Ime and Sengun, didn't necessarily, Sengun more so than Ime, but didn't necessarily have good games either. And then, well, the question becomes, how do you win? If you're not good at shooting and your inside threats are not winning you the game either, well, you're not going to win regardless of the opponent. And they were playing a not very good Miami Heat team, a 500 team, and they still couldn't make it work. So just all in all, just a disappointing loss, but more symptoms of what we've seen so far this season.
Yeah, to me, this was the worst Sengun game in a while. I mean, he's had some pretty bad ones, I think, lately, but this one, this was more of a playoff style game. And, you know, the Rockets kind of get away with putting Sengun on the worst player, the guy they want to shoot or do something. Pelle Larsson is 32% three-point shooter. Larsson just destroyed him. I mean, he just went at him, you know, several times. There was a play in the third quarter where Bam went around Sengun. I swear there was 5-6 feet between them the whole time he went up uncontested for a dunk. You know, there were times where he was caught flat-footed twice. Ime Udoka had rage timeouts to chew out Sengun, including the one where he was caught flat-footed and, you know, Adebayo missed and Ware got the board. I mean, you guys, the tip-in slam, you guys have kind of already addressed this, but I think what he had 6 boards today. I think Bam had 11 and Ware had 15. So it was like 26 boards between those two. Yeah, I mean, Jabari not being there helps, you know, or hurts, you know, Sengun. That's a factor as well. But I mean, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I've been saying this for like 5 years. This is always my fear with Sengun. Always is like, we're going to get into a playoff style situation and this kind of stuff could happen. Now he's had games that have proven me wrong where he looks really good, but this game, if you watch this game, this is the fear with Sengun. Why would you want to have somebody who's a pretty good offensive player, but could be a liability defensively when you're, you know, having a different style center could have such a more significant impact. So look, it's not his best game, so I'm not going to judge him by just specifically this game. I think he'll have more better games where he's much more energetic. I think, was it the Kings game? He looked quite spry, but this was a game that kind of brings fear to me. Reminds me of all the Sengun takes.
Yeah, Sengun was minus 18 today in his 35 minutes, and Kevin Durant was plus 5 in his 37 minutes, and most of those minutes overlap. So that tells you how bad they were in the Sengun minutes without KD. And you also look at Clint Capella off the bench was a neutral in the plus minus. So all the advantages that the Heat had on the glass and in terms of bullying the Rockets, they came against Alperen Sengun, and specifically when Sengun didn't have the KD stimulus factor offensively, just insane shot making to get the Rockets going. And so, yeah, you shouldn't judge him just by this game. And I agree, this was a rough matchup, especially without Jabari, but it's concerning. And that's why I think the Steven Adams injury was so much bigger than a lot of people gave it credit for. Because as you said plenty of times, Dave, offensive rebounding and rebounding overall is this team's superpower. And for the Rockets to have this happen to them against any team, this was not on a back-to-back, to be able, I know overall, I think they won the rebounding battle very slightly, right?
They did. And we were talking about this, Paulo and I, before you came on. I had like 5 or 6 rebounds in the final minute. It was crazy, but they did win 59-54. It was probably a pretty even matchup. Yeah.
But if you watch the game, it felt like the Heat were by far the more physical team.
Yeah.
And so it's disconcerting when you have an all-star center and that happens to you. It speaks to the importance of Steven Adams. Now, maybe they target a guy like a Kevon Looney on the buyout market the next few days. We'll have to wait and see. The deadline is actually tomorrow for players to get released. So within 24 hours or so, I think we'll have a lot more clarity as far as who the targets might be. Sure seems like the Rockets are targeting someone with, holding on to the 50 game limit for JD Davison. We've talked about that before. I don't think we need to go into it today. We'll talk more about that on Monday once we know who the actual potential targets are when the buyout list is finalized. But I just think Jabari specifically, let's transition to him, because I do think that this game showed you how important he is as a communicator, as a connector. I think it's absolutely silly for all the discussions in recent days about starting Reed Sheppard. And it's fair. You can have that conversation. Reed wasn't great in the second half, but he's been very good overall the last few games. I think it is crystal clear. If Reed Sheppard is going to start for this basketball team, It's not in place of Amen Thompson. It's not in place of Jabari Smith Jr. It's in place of Tari Eason. I think there's a reason the Rockets didn't start Tari until Christmas. There's a reason why Amen Thompson and Jabari were confirmed starters before preseason even began. And I think when it's Sengun and 4 perimeter players, then those flaws become even more glaring. I think today showed you need, Jabari isn't a guy that jumps off the page in terms of his totals defensively when it comes to block shots and rebounding, but the presence, the physical edge that he plays with is just so important. And he's a great communicator on that end as well. And so if you're trying to surround Alperen Sengun with basically 4 perimeter players, I think you're going to have a lot of matchups where it looks like tonight. So, we talked the other night about how it's silly to talk about replacing Amen Thompson because of the combination of his defense and then the rim pressure offensively. Well, I think tonight you saw how valuable Jabari is in terms of making threes. The Rockets struggle to do that at volume, and also the presence. I'm sorry, Tari is just not nearly the same archetype of player. So say what you will about Reed Sheppard. Paulo, I'll bring you in on this because obviously we haven't talked to you since Reed Mania started on social media with all these calls to start him. You can certainly make the argument, but I just think it's pretty clear to me, if you're going to start Reed Sheppard, it shouldn't be at the expense of Amen Thompson or Jabari Smith Jr. Paulo, what do you think about that?
I just don't think you should start Reed Sheppard. You're supposed to maximize the talent that you have on your team. The Rockets have 3 guys who are supposed to be go-to scorers, and Reed Sheppard is right now better at that than Amen Thompson is. And so you have to spread those guys out to make sure you have always got 2 on the floor. And to do that, it's a lot easier if one of them comes off the bench, and Sengun and KD are not going to come off the bench. So just you've got to manage 48 minutes. You're not just managing the best starting lineup possible. And so that's how I feel about that. This game in particular, Reed was, really good in the first half. Made some timely threes. But then again, he ended up shooting for the game 37%, which is not his average, but is probably the best shooting. Yeah, the best shooting we had from 3 in the game. Even with all of the misses in the second half, if you average all that out, he still had a decent game shooting-wise, right? And I guess in the second half, what came into play was what we've talked about earlier again, which is when he's playing with Sengun and with KD, especially down the stretch when the responsibilities are higher, it seems like he's more hesitant to shoot. He's less intentional about getting his own shots. He's less crisp when he gets around screens. He forces it a little bit less, and he's not getting those same opportunities, partly because of how less intentional he is about getting the ball in those spots. But then again, bringing it back to Jabari Smith Jr., which is what you were touching on, it's yes, the rebounding that you talked about. It's yes, as much as people don't like talking about Jabari Smith as this elite defender one-on-one, which, I can see why he's a good defender, not necessarily a shutdown guy, but he does help make up for a lot of Sengun's deficiencies that we were projecting him to be that earlier on when he was first drafted. And then he wasn't that good of a weak side defender coming into the league, but he has really improved. And since we had our mind made up early on about how he probably couldn't be that guy, he's now become a lot more of that guy, and he's not getting the credit for it. But even more so, offensively, I think it makes a lot of difference. The Rockets put up 105 points. As much as we want to talk about the defense, and the Heat did put up 115. I actually not there 115.
Yeah, 115, 105. Yep.
Not going to beat a lot of teams scoring 105 points, right? Down the stretch in clutch time, yes, the defense was even more so of a problem. And yes, the Heat are a much less talented team, and so defense should have made it so this isn't even a close game at all. But then again, at 105 points in a game, you're not going to beat a lot of teams. And Jabari Smith Jr. is someone who, yes, can help you shoot the threes, but, and this is the really underrated part, is he scores a lot of those, this is not what we use the word connector for, but those buckets that string possessions together when KD is not isoing or Sengun is not isoing or someone is not making threes. Jabari strings together possessions, scoring those mid-range buckets and those offensive rebounds that he sometimes gets. Is someone who can very easily get easy offense that was really missed this game as well. But then again, yes, the Heat are a lot less talented of a team, but you're missing Jabari, you're missing Fred, you're missing Steven Adams, and the only guy that played well this game which I guess maybe Capella you could make an argument for. But other than that, the only guy that played well was KD. It's not going to beat anyone, basically, if nobody's playing well.
A couple of comments from the chat. Tari Eason, over his last 9 games, shooting just 28% from 3. Now,
it's even worse over the last 8, but sorry, yeah, go ahead. He had a good one 9 games ago.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Yeah, 8 right, the last 8, it's brutal. It's like, it might be like 25% or something.
Yeah. So it's been a rough stretch. I don't expect it to continue, but I also don't think you should expect the 47% he was at for, his first 30 or so games of this season to continue. I think he's going to, slide back into hopefully upper 30s rather than mid 30s. I think that'd be a very good outcome. But at the end of the day, when you look at everything else, and specifically the fit with the starting lineup, Jabari is much better, especially in recent games, at attacking off the dribble, at making things happen. He's got a little more fluidity to him. Tari, I suspect it's the combination of the lower leg the last couple of years, and then he's been playing with the ankle strain the last couple of months, but he just doesn't seem as springy as he has at times in the past. Like, it seems for the majority of this season, most of Tari's value has been as a 3-point shooter. And now that the 3-point shooting is going south, some of the other flaws are becoming much more pronounced. And Ime had a rage timeout for Tari as well in the first half of this game.
Yeah, and the funny thing is Tari had rage back. Did you guys see that? That was a big friction moment. I was like, whoa, do we have an issue on our hands? They were definitely jawing at each other.
Yeah, 100%. And then there's a few other comments about the struggles of DFS who, yeah, I've said to give him time. I did think in the middle of this month, the Clippers game right before the All-Star break and the Hornets game right after it were encouraging. He's been terrible since. I don't know what to tell you. Tomorrow is March 1st, so we're running out of time. It's not impossible, but this time a year ago, Dave, you've made the comparison to Steven Adams coming off of his surgery the year before. Well, yeah. Steven was showing a few more flashes now than DFS is. So it's not impossible, but to go back to the Craig Ackerman phrase, it's getting late early.
Right. And for some reason, I guess I'm just not panicked about DFS because of my whole, still looking at next year as being even better. I'm not giving up on this year. I want to be clear, but I think next year should be even better. And the fact is, if DFS doesn't do well, you're still just fine because it's an expiring deal next year. It should be an asset that you can move, in the right deal. So that's one for sure. I agree with you because I think Adams and Jabari would have made a big difference. One other thing, Ben, I know you mentioned the Tari things, started 8-9 games ago. That's exactly when Reed took off. Reed was really struggling for a good long stretch, and Reed has been like 50% since then. I do want to talk a little bit about Reed. I mean, like I said, as far as Jabari, I consider Jabari to be unappreciated and undervalued in our fan base, period. And I think a game like this at least shows that he's a guy who can hit threes and he does defend. I think that when you boil this game down, the box score, you're looking at the rebounds, you're looking at the possession battle, the turnovers, all very similar. What it wasn't similar today was 3-point shooting. The bench 1 for 8, the starters 8 for 28, and Miami, that was the difference in the game, along with some of these other things. But as far as Reed Sheppard, I mean, it's a big story. He played 36 minutes. As far as a meaningful game, I wonder if that's a career high. I don't know, because I know he's played in some games that, started.
I would guess Golden State before Thanksgiving, but it's up there.
Maybe he did play that high of minutes in that game. He had a red hot start. Hit his first 2 threes, started the game. Matter of fact, that was funny. The Rockets jumped out of the gate 14-4 in this game. They hit 8 of their first 10 shots, looked like world beaters. Then that 11-2 kind of Sengun defensive run that the Miami went on, and then like I said, 37-14 overall run. But Reed looked really good. He ended up hitting 4 of his first 6. Then he missed his final 5. And it was interesting because Ime did rest him early in the 4th, and you could see that this was setting up for Reed to close. And he did. He missed some threes down the stretch. Rockets, again, it wasn't on Reed. I'm not blaming Reed, but he played, and the lead widened for Miami during that stretch. So, 5 of 14 overall, 4 of 11 from 3. I think you got to keep playing him. Even if he's coming off the bench, you got to keep doing it. Yeah. Ben and you and I have talked about this, like Amen and Reed, like we want to see these guys develop, especially, for this year, for the playoffs, but also for next year. So I'm hoping Reed will continue to play good minutes, even if he's coming off the bench.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that even though he started with Amen today, it felt like Amen was still the closest thing to a point guard. They were largely using Reed as an off-ball guy, a relocation shooter. And in the first half, it worked very well. So I think we should keep that in the back of our minds. I mean, I've heard that the Rockets internally sort of view him as a 2 as well. Now, he can handle the ball, so it's not as if there's no point guard skills there, but at the same time, he's not a drop-in Fred VanVleet replacement either. Like, it's a
like a
little bit
hybrid.
yeah. And so, Dave, I'm curious your thoughts. Well, let me start with this. Did you watch the Amazon Prime or the Space City broadcast today?
Amazon Prime.
Okay, I thought so, based on our talks during the game. So one thing that Craig Ackerman pointed out during the game, and I thought the same, Reed was hesitant for most of the second half. And I thought, late in the game, he started firing away again, and he mostly missed them. But for especially the first 18 minutes or so, there were some looks he could have put up and probably should have on a couple of instances, but it felt like he was deferring, given that it was a close game in the second half, to the two big-name All-Stars, Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun. And there's a couple of ways to look at it. You can look at it the way Paulo did and say, well, you've got these two, in theory, high-level creators. Now, I know Sengun wasn't today, but in theory, he's an all-star for a reason. And your bench, especially if DFS is struggling like he is right now, could use the stimulus. I mean, the Rockets lost these games. They lost this game in the minutes that Sengun played with the bench when you didn't have KD. And so, yeah, in theory, if you were bringing in Reed with that unit, then, Reed isn't going to be quite the creator that KD is, but he can mitigate that a little bit. So that's an argument in favor of, as Paulo laid out, making Reed your Manu Ginobili, if you will. The flip side, maybe in the long run, Reed needs to get better at figuring out when to, put his fingerprints on a game, when to shoot, when to pull back. Because for a lot of this year, his role's been simplified as a sixth man, and that, he's got the permanent green light. And I think for a young player, year 2, 21 years old, that's good in a lot of ways. But in the grand scheme, if you want to get him to, potentially like that offensive engine level that I think fans see him as, and I believe the Rockets internally see him as that as well, it's just going to take a little bit of time. There's still a lot of development still to go. Then maybe it benefits you to sort of put him with the starters now. So I'm just sort of curious your thoughts on that blend, Dave. And it doesn't have to be like one extreme or the other. It could be bringing him off the bench, but also letting him close so that, he has exposure in both of these configurations. But how do you blend, I guess, needing to provide a stimulus for those bench units without KD with also the idea that, hey, there's a big picture and eventually you want to get Reed more confident to where, he's more comfortable operating with KD and Alpi in high leverage possessions?
So that's a great question. I mean, not only that, you got Fred, waiting in the wings next year and
Right.
balance there for that too. I mean, I look at this when Reed starts, you've got a pretty good, strong 5, and the bench is so weak. I would love for him to continue to come off the bench, not put all this pressure on him, but increase his minutes. That's just my personal view. I'm not saying this is necessarily correct, because I think you look at it and the bench is missing, kind of like you said, that stimulus. They need something to kind of run that. But I do think I'd like to see his minutes at least at about 28. Right now they've been increasing for a while. I mean, my personal opinion is I think the Rockets have been doing a pretty darn good job of developing Reed. And I think the front office, I mean, they said it as soon as they drafted him. They were so ridiculously high on him. As a matter of fact, we got mocked at times. Like they would have taken him number 1 very clearly from the way that they said if he was not available at number 3, they were going to trade down. So you're like, okay, so they wouldn't have taken Castle or Klingon or Sar, or I guess Ricochet looks, like a pretty wise decision right now. But, so I think that they've been a big believers, and Ime as well. It's just Ime is balancing this win now with developing Reed as well. He loves Reed. I think he wants him to develop, but there's a lot to learn. And I think he's made quite a bit of strides this year. So, but to answer your question, I'd kind of like to see him continue to come off the bench, but just see increased minutes and then eventually take that role. And one last note on that. If you remember last year, Amen was coming off the bench and there was a big, huge push. Like, this is ridiculous that Amen's coming off the bench. Why is this happening? He needs to start. Jabari needs to go to the bench. That was a big, big, big push in the fan base. And it's kind of funny that it's now flipped. And for some people, they want him over Amen. So I just would say, just be patient. It's coming. We hope Reed Sheppard will eventually start. Just let it happen naturally and just, increase his minutes as he develops, is my personal opinion.
And Paulo, let me bring you in on this. So Dave and I have talked a little bit about Ime in recent shows. I don't think, Paulo, that we've had a pod since it feels like a lot of Rockets Twitter has turned on Ime Udoka. I'm just curious your thoughts on some of the narratives of the past week, because certainly it does feel like there's some meat being left on the bone offensively, and you can nitpick exactly how and when they're using Reed Sheppard. I get that the collapse against the Knicks in Madison Square Garden was very frustrating, and if you make one or two plays different, one or two substitutions different, the whole thing can change. Yet at the end of the day, like the Rockets have had all these injuries, and even with the loss today, they're 37-22, third in the Western Conference. They still have a game buffer in the loss column, which is what matters, on the Denver Nuggets. Rematch with the Nuggets coming up in a week and a half in Denver. That will be a big game. And even with the loss today, look, they just wrapped up a 3-1 week. I believe they're 14-7 in their last 21 games. So, we sort of, hit the panic button when they went through a 21 game stretch right before that when they were 10-11. Well, now they're 14-7 in the last 21. I don't know that they look like a championship contender, but I mean, at some point you do have to look at the overall results and, 37-22, number 3 in the West, 3-1 week. I mean, it's tough to be, as I see it, too despondent, especially when, there's reasons to believe, for all the criticisms of Ime Udoka over his young NBA coaching career, like he's a guy who has shown an ability to have his teams playing the best ball late in the year. 2 years ago, they had the 11-game winning streak when Jalen Green broke out in March. Last year, they had the 9-game winning streak, and the double big took hold. His 1 year in Boston, they started 25-25 in late January, and then they were 26-6 over the final 32 games of that regular season, February, March, and April, and then they went on to the NBA Finals. So as frustrating as it is, it feels like after that Knicks game, a lot of people just sort of said, well, the narrative for this season, it's already set. This team is what it is. But historically, that hasn't been the case with Ime Udoka. Historically, his teams have shown an ability to sort of find that extra gear in the second half of the season. They didn't show it today. They have shown more signs overall lately. I guess, Paulo, I'm just curious your thoughts on, balancing the meat that's being left on the bone offensively, because I do think there's some validity to the critiques there. I certainly wouldn't be opposed to bringing in an offensive version of Jeff Bezdelek to the, assistant coaching pool this offseason. But at the same time, balancing that against the big picture. And, when you consider who the Rockets are missing, it's hard to complain about their record and placement in the standings, right?
Yeah, about the Ime Udoka thing, I do think that there are things that are valid criticisms, and looking at it from a, holistic view, I think, yes, I do think that Ime Udoka might be considered more of a floor raiser than a ceiling raiser. Like, he is someone who was really valuable to bring this team from, a team that just wasn't good at all, change the standards, establish a new culture, get them to where they are today. I think it is valid to question whether he is the guy to take that team to a championship level team. Then again, with the Celtics, who were, really, really talented, right? They weren't lacking for talent when he was there. So that's maybe because there's as much credit as he gets for getting them to the finals. But that's not my point overall. I think there's some validity to saying, okay, this may be a team that's at a point where it might make sense to bring in someone who's more of a ceiling raiser than Udoka, right? And at the same time, I do think that one of the famous sports metaphors is that guys that come in and change the culture, those floor raisers, that in those defensive-oriented guys, eventually the effort and play hard voice eventually wears thin in the locker room, right? Mm-hmm. When you first come in, your impact is a little bit bigger. And as guys get used, and then you intimidate the team and you rally these guys together, as time goes on, I think that's something that decays more than someone who's a tactician or a X's and O's genius, because that just translates unless you're one of the guys that only has one system. That eventually, I think that kind of like Steve Kerr is someone that will last through time a little bit longer. I do think that those two are valid criticisms. At the same time, what is he working with this season? He doesn't have Fred. He doesn't have Steven Adams. At the beginning of the season, they were historically good.
And they're third in the West, yeah. Or I don't know if they are now after losing tonight, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, they're still third in the West, right? You could argue that they should be better than the Spurs, but then again, the Spurs are pretty damn close to the Thunder at this moment. And it just feels like hard to judge based on how much different a typical season is from what he got this season. Tari missed time. Jabari Smith missed a couple of games here and there. Sengun has missed time. KD has missed surprisingly low amount of time. But even Finney-Smith has turned out to be completely unplayable. Josh Okogie was a nice boost earlier in the season, has fallen off a cliff, played 7 minutes this game. I think it's worth debating whether he or DFS should play, whether those minutes should be swapped. But he's kind of managing a lot of adversity, and I think perhaps a coach that's a higher, kind of more of a ceiling raiser, might have this team currently with a worse record. I think with all of the injuries that the Rockets are battling through, I think it's pretty impressive that we're still talking about this team with the expectation that the season is a failure if you don't, have a really competitive, at least, second round exit, right? But I think for most teams, if you take out 2 starters and a big rotation piece is just completely useless, and you have an underperforming star player in Alperen Sengun, well, you should translate that to the Nuggets. For example, let's imagine Jokic is having an underperforming season. Jamal Murray is about the same. But Aaron Gordon's out for, an extended amount of time.
Does this mean that you're saying Alperen Sengun is Nikola Jokic?
Sorry. That might get me some brownie points with the chat, but not necessarily.
We have Jokic and Curry on this team.
Wow, yeah.
No, yeah. So it's not a take. The move on from Udoka take, it's not a take that I necessarily hate. I just think it's a bit early to do, or it's a bit early to have that judgment because we don't have, I don't think, enough evidence at this point to make a decision like that. And before I throw it back to you guys, I did want to touch on one thing about Reed. I think a significant part of why we lost this game in the fourth quarter was because, well, if you reference Paulo Larson scoring on Sengun earlier on, in the fourth quarter, there were like 3 possessions where, and this goes against Ime Udoka as well, where by default, Ime was guarding Paulo Larson and he got the ball inside and just did whatever you wanted. Like, just massive size mismatch, massive strength mismatch. Reed does need to get a lot stronger, both defensively and offensively. Sometimes he dribbles into a hole and has no ability whatsoever to get out of it. The guys just kind of hug him, and there's no going from there. But he did have, later, it was not just not shooting well. Defensively, there were 2 or 3 possessions where it was an instant defensive breakdown because Reed was on a guy much bigger than him.
Interesting. I saw that last game. I didn't notice it as much this game, but you did. I saw the Larson-Reed friction at the end. Did you guys see that?
Yeah.
It looked like Reed was pissed, and like maybe Larson was giving him the business or something. But yeah, I didn't. I'm sure it happened. I just didn't catch it because I usually try to focus on Reed. But so you saw some breakdowns.
Especially in they were. The reason this is also a Ime Udoka comment is because they weren't. Billy Larson wasn't getting switched onto Reed. He was with him by default to start a lot of possessions, and they just told Larson to post up and gave him the ball, and Reed couldn't really do anything about it. So that's both a Reed comment and a Ime Udoka comment as well, because, well, why is Reed by default being matched up against Billy Larson when it's a clear mismatch that's getting instantly punished?
Well, and Dave, let me pose the same Ime Udoka question to you because you followed the Rockets longer than either of us. What kind of grade? Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
You're going back 30 years with ClutchFans.
Yeah, I'm old, dude, for sure. No, I'm serious. I'm just laughing at it's the truth of it. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious what grade you would give him because for all the hysteria out there, when I look at the big picture, depending on the day, might go B, might go B minus. If I'm particularly pessimistic, maybe I go like C plus. But I just can't look at this season and considering what they're missing and consider it off the rails bad. Like, he hasn't been a perfect coach, but I don't subscribe to the theories that there's some major problem here or that there's, friction, that he's not playing the players enough, that the front office wants him to play. Like, I just think the Rockets are, sort of working with a hand or two tied behind their backs. And,
100%.
It hasn't been pretty. It's been, ugly at times. But all in all, the results are what they are. And while it's not a perfect season, I can't get to the depths that a lot of Rockets fans, I feel like, have been the last few weeks. I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm biased or not. I look at Ime Udoka as kind of like a coach for the long haul. That's just me. I feel like they got somebody from a San Antonio tree. Like my original hope was they found their pop, right? Nobody's going to last that long. But I'm saying it's going to be rare in the NBA. Let's put it that way. But that they'd have him for several years. He established a culture. Try to remember what the culture was like before he got here. And of course, Dylan and Fred and, Jeff Green and Landale and all those guys, the vets that they brought in, it was really, really bad. And I think he changed things around quite a bit. I can't judge him for this year. I think the KD trade has accelerated things for people, like meaning, oh gosh, he's going to be 38 next year. So what was the trade about? And if he's not winning this year, and look, I'm not saying that if you took, Fred VanVleet and Steven Adams and made them the core of a rando team, that they're going to be a great team. They are very, very important complementary players to what the Rockets do. And it hurts them significantly without those guys. That's why I feel like developing Reed and Amen is important. I think that they're doing a pretty good job of that. I do think in the Knicks game, he screwed up. He went into prevent defense.
Yeah.
I've said this before, but I'll say it again. The criticism was that he didn't close with Reed. Okay, maybe, but Reed played that first 6+ minutes of that first quarter. The lead went from 18 to 6. And if Tari hit a couple free throws to build it to 8, but he was already pulling him out.
And leaving DFS on an island against Towns.
Yes, and he went to a prevent defense, and whatever they switched their defensive work on Brunson, and that burned them. I mean, Jabari got I thought he did a solid job 1-on-1, but Brunson just hit fadeaway 15-footers, and that wing stop lineup, the prevent defense got burned, and so that decision backfired. But I think what he was saying was, okay, I gave Reed that time. I'm not going to defend the Knicks game, but let's just say that was bad. I just think he's a good coach, and maybe it doesn't work out, but I think you can't judge that now. That's at least an end of next season kind of thing. When you see how you have everybody that you expect to have. Right now, I don't feel in any way Ime Udoka's job is threatened. And I think when you look at what he's done without Fred and without Adams now for half the season, I'm pretty impressed.
Well, last topic, and we've already gone on a little long, so I think we can wrap up after this. And Paulo, I'll tee you up because Dave and I have talked about buyout targets the last few shows. I won't mention Kevon Looney again because I think we've done that too many times already.
Sorry about
that. Paulo, aside from Kevon Looney, is there anyone that jumps out to you? And someone in the chat was actually asking if you had input on this. Is there anyone that jumps out as someone available now or potentially available that might be a fit? And, I will say with the DFS struggles sort of accelerating in recent games, I still think they're most likely to look at the big market. I think they are likely to at least pursue a buyout signing, how tightly they've managed the remaining games on J.D. Davison's two-way. He's maxed out at 50. I think he's been, in the upper 40s for a while. That tells me that, they want to make a buyout signing for reasons we led off this show discussing. I think they need reinforcements up front. I think that was evident today. But with DFS struggling, I mean, there is a world where maybe it makes sense to bring in another forward or wing type. I've seen some people express interest in Chris Middleton if he becomes available. Paulo, I'm just curious, one or two names that jump out to you other than Kevon Looney as potential fits here.
Yeah, so I'll first tell you a name that I've seen, at least on Reddit, a lot of people talk about that I really don't like. Tyus Jones is not as good as people think he is. Complete liability on defense. Please don't mention him again.
And let me cut you off right there. I think it's pretty clear that if they decide they want to guard, they're just going to stick with J.D. Davison. They like the guy. There's a reason they trusted him in that Oklahoma City game earlier this month. I think, if you give him a contract now, you're more likely to be able to keep him the next few years on a very team-friendly deal. And they just had so many opportunities to add guard depth, and they haven't passed on it. So I really do believe they want to give, even if fans don't like it, majority of the point guard reps to Amen and Reed. And so I just think that it's probably a center, maybe a wing/forward, but I would just be surprised if guard is the target. Sorry for interrupting. Go on.
Yeah. So, if it is a center, I think the answer is just Kevon Looney. I don't think there's anybody else out there that's...
I banish you from saying that.
But I will say, I'll give you a little bit of a hot take. If there's a guy that the Rockets should convert that's a two-way, it's actually Isaiah Crawford. It's not J.D. Davison. As far as other buyout guys, the guys I had ready were just, you look at the Bulls since the trade deadline, they're playing a bunch of guards. They're giving him such small, tiny bits of minutes. Like Colin Sexton's playing 18 minutes. Anthony Simons, and this is in a game where Anthony Simons was out, which is the last game that they played. So I don't think they finish the season with all of those guys still on the roster. I think some of them get bought out. And I do think if it is Colin Sexton, more so than if it is Anthony Simons. Those are guys that might be worth taking a shot at, especially because not only do you need help for who is playing right now, you also need help for if another guard goes down to injury because they have to. Aaron Holiday, this game was not good. So I think those guys, and I'm not sure if there's been news on this, but I still think that there's gotta be a shot DeMar DeRozan gets bought out. And I'm.
Is he expiring this year?
No, but he has a very small partial guarantee next year. It's like $8 million, something like that. So they'd have to eat a little bit of money, but it's pretty small.
And they may even be able to get him to give back that amount in a buyout since he's gonna hit free agency or earlier. Who knows? And he's gonna likely go to a contender. If he's a good fit or not, who knows? Not necessarily the best defensive guy. Not necessarily the guy that loves the personnel on this team the most. He seems to always get into conflict with Lena.
And got the cheap shot last week. Yeah.
Yeah, and last year, every time we played DeMar DeRozan, we took it personally. But going back to the other bit, which I think is the more interesting take, and I've had it since the beginning of the season, I think Kennedy Crawford's a real player. When the very little chances that he gets, he seems like a real player. He has the measurables. If you look at his stats in the G League, he is a good shooter. I think that he's more projectable as a long-term beast than J.D. Davison is because of the size. So if they're looking for a wing, I don't think the market's great out there. I would seriously consider. They might not need to give him a standard NBA deal because he's probably got a lot more NBA days than J.D. Davison has. Although I'm not sure if that's counted as Gibbs played or days with the main team. I think it's days with the main team, right? That might be a little bit different, but he definitely played less. And I do think that there's a real world where he's a better player than Joshua Gogan and Finney Smith are right now.
Just to add to that real quick, Ben, I know we're going to close up here. I don't have a name. I just think that they're going to, if they add somebody via buyout, it's going to be somebody on the bigger, like a big, maybe a 4, but somebody who complements these other players. And I say, if we go back and look at that trade deadline, Kobe White day, right? Like everybody's going with Reed Mania right now. This doesn't happen if you had brought somebody in who plays another point guard. And that's why we were saying all along, they're not going to bring somebody in who's going to play ahead of a man or ahead of a Reed. I'm going to say Reed mainly, right? Nobody's playing ahead of a man as far as they're concerned. But I'm saying Reed, they want to develop Reed. They believe in Reed. I don't know where they don't believe in Reed stuff comes from. You look at Jokic's minutes, how he came up the league. Look at Jalen Johnson. He was in the G League his first year. This is what development looks like. You're not going to play 35 minutes a night unless you're in a tanking team like Jalen and Jabari right off the bat. They're going to just hand them all the minutes because there's nothing in front of them. And so this is a win now team. Reed's developing. They would want to find somebody who sets good screens for Reed, who basically can complement and highlight Reed or other players, Sengun, KD, somebody like that, and it will be an underwhelming signing. I will say that right now. And I'm not going to say the name of who I think it is. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just say one more thing before we close that I actually forgot on Reed as well. I think it's a bit criminal that I haven't checked the stats, it's purely from watching, that we see a lot more Reed KD lineups than Reed Sengun lineups. Like Reed and Sengun should be a really deadly combo on offense, right? I know maybe the defense is the answer there, but they should be getting more reps on offense because, well, Reed's someone who can score at all 3 levels, who has the pace of a lead ball handler in the pick and roll. And if Sengun puts some extra oomph, let's call it that, on those screens, like that should be a deadly offensive combination, more so than having both Reed, MTV, both in the backcourt spots, around the perimeter, passing the ball to each other, hoping that the defense overcommits to one of them by miracle, or eventually leading into a KD, trying to get through 2 guys to get a shot. They should be trying to at least lean on that to see if there's something there because, well, first there surely is. We might need more reps, but that's gotta be explored, especially because we're not elite on defense anyway, so we might as well try to be elite on offense.
And to address the comment that Dave briefly put on the screen, the update on Jabari, they think it's a minor ankle sprain, but I think they view that game Monday as one that they should be able to win even without him. And so if you stack today's game off with Monday's game off, that'll give him a full week between games. And I think if there's one thing that you should learn from watching Tari Eason the last few games, I think it's pretty clear that he came back a little too early from his ankle sprain in January, and he's had consistent issues. Ankle sprains are so easy to linger. So even if it's minor, I think the way the Rockets view it, His sprain happened late Thursday in Orlando. And so you give him this game off. Monday's a game in Washington against a bad Wizards team. They should be able to win regardless. And then you don't play again until Thursday at home against the Warriors. That will give Jabari a full week off, and hopefully that's enough that he can put it behind him and it doesn't linger like what's happened with Tari the last few games. So I think that's what's happening there. It's nothing alarming. It's just, I think they see this as a spot in the schedule that, hey, we can sneak him a few days, and then hopefully he comes back against the Warriors and is good the rest of the way.
Absolutely. Ben, Paulo, appreciate all you guys comments and everything about this game. Rockets fall 115-105. We'll be back Monday when they take on Washington, as Ben said. Should be a win and salvage this road trip, go to 2-1. On the bright side, Rockets are 37-22. They are exactly what they were last year, 37-22. I think the team last year lost the next couple of games. Maybe they catch up here. I have them 2 games behind the pace. I thought they'd be 39-20 at this point, but still very, very good. All things, the injuries and stuff considered. So really good outlook so far, despite the game today. We'll be back Monday for sure. Ben, Paulo, anything you guys want to say before we close?
No, I'll just tease to Monday's show. We've got Michael Shapiro of Cron.com joining us, so he'll have some perspective, potentially on buyout names, because by Monday, which is March 2nd, we'll know who is and isn't out there. And so we can, if the game goes the way I think we hope it will, which is that, the Rockets beat a bad Wizards team by a comfortable margin, then maybe we can talk a little bit more about the buyout market on Monday, or maybe the Rockets have even signed someone at that point and we can react to that. But yeah, we'll have Michael Shapiro, Cron.com, with us for that one.
Awesome. Appreciate you guys, and thank everybody for listening and watching today. Appreciate all the support, and we will see you guys Monday. Have a great rest of your weekend.